After a 3 a.m. wake-up call, I'm at the Maryland and Delaware Railroad headquarters in Federalsburg as a near full moon sets over the flat terrain of the Delmarva Peninsula just before sunrise. It's unusual I head south from Pennsylvania for snow, but a recent Arctic blast coated the lower peninsula with several more inches than 3 hours north back home. Much of it remains unmelded in the 20-degree temps in the days that followed. While we arrive just after 7 when the crew goes on duty, the doors on the engine shed wouldn't open for another 2.5 hours, revealing the last operating RS-3M on the railroad, as well as anywhere for freight service in the country. The 1201 and 02 have been down for the count for months, with no incentive to be repaired when only a few weeks away from major operational changes. "1203 fires up at 10 o'clock sharp, finally pulling out into the sun a couple minutes later. Several truckloads of potash leave the transload facility behind the shop as we wait in the bitter cold. Agriculture makes up a major portion of the economy on the Delmarva, reflected in much of the rail traffic in this region. The Maryland and Delaware operates from 3 locations. The Centerville and Chestertown lines out of Massey, interchanging with the DCR at Townsend, the seldom-served Snow Hill line at Selbyville, and the Seaford line out of Federalsburg between the DCR interchange and Cambridge, though presently no customers are served beyond Hurlock. These lines were omitted from Conrail's system plan after the takeover from Penn Central in 1976, but the 2 states petitioned for continued service by subsidizing their operation for another year. By summer 1977, the Maryland and Delaware Railroad was incorporated and selected as the designated operator of these branches by the Maryland Department of Transportation. Maryland DOT also owns the RS-3Ms, purchased in the 90s from Delaware Coastline. Built in the 1950s for Delaware, Lackawanna, and Western, these RS-3s underwent conversion by Conrail in 1979 to EMD 567B power plants taken from retired E-units at the DeWitt shops. These so-called DeWitt Jeeps maintain the look of an Alco road switcher, but there's no mistaking the classic EMD sound as 1203 throttles ahead to its train on the west side of town. With all the customer switching done the day prior, a train was already assembled and left on the hill by the switch to Solo Cup, ready for today's crew to expedite back to Seaford. A couple boxcars from Solo Cup, covered hoppers from the transload in town and Purdue and Hurlock, and LPG tanks from Trigas and Oil in Williamsburg make up today's lengthy consist of empties. On the other side of town at Connector Road, 3 empty high-cube F-boxes are pulled from dark container. Today's train has a 4-person crew, 3 aboard the 1203 and another following around in a company vehicle to flag crossings and help switch the inbound cars in Seaford. While the crew puts the train back together, we get a head start on moving to the next location just across the state line in Delaware. The 9-mile trip to Seaford passes quick, and for video is a case of picking one quality spot. We settle on the curve at the state line in Oak Grove, the only non-tangent section of track between the last location and Seaford. The train moves surprisingly fast on the stick rail. The harmonic rocking of modern rail cars behind a 70-year-old road switcher is quite the sight in 2025. While rail cars will continue to rock back and forth through here for hopefully many more years to come, the Delmarva Central Railroad is set to begin operating the Maryland and Delaware sometime in February, leaving a questionable fate for the Maryland-owned locomotives, as the Carload Express livery will now dominate most of the peninsula. Moving 3 miles down the line, we're now 4/10 of a mile onto DCR trackage at the Route 20 crossing, protected by a flagman as work is still being done on the new signal installation. And for those wondering, locomotive horns do not have to sound for crossings protected by a flagger when speeds are 15 miles per hour or less. We get ahead as they roll into Seaford, crossing the old plant gate crossings to the former DuPont nylon factory. The yard is just around the curve, though DCR may leave shorter pickups on the siding. Today's vacancy means we're in luck. A potentially large inbound train will be lifted and possibly switched out in the yard. .1203 cuts away from their train along Nanticoke Avenue, making the max extent of their run to clear the switch to head back for the inbounds. The numerous silos at this location are served by barge operations on the Nanticoke River, ending just before the Seaford movable bridge on the Delmarva Main Line in the background. They pass their set-off as well as other cars sitting in the yard. Not all of these are for interchange. Delmarva Central works customers along the river, including 10 cars of asphalt for Russell Standard at the end of the spur on the left. At the other end of the yard, the four-man crew is now used to the fullest potential. The engineer and conductor on the 1203 will work switching the cars, and another to flag the crossing and man the nearby switch. The brakeman also rides down into the yard, getting into position for cars dropped on the other track. The propane cars for tri-gas will have to be moved to the rear, so they pull ahead to cut away from the boxcars. Keep an eye on the wheels, as sand will be used for traction when starting to pull. As they pull to clear the switch, we get a glimpse of part of the DuPont factory that employed well over 4,000 in the 1960s, making Seaford the nylon capital of the world, the first plant to ever produce the synthetic textile starting in 1939. As the tank cars are shoved far enough back to allow room for additional cars, the conductor reviews the paperwork to execute a game plan for sorting the rest of the consist in the correct order. Delmarva Central has made upgrades to the tracks and switches in recent months, including relocating the switch to the runaround to the other side of the crossing. Despite being called No Name Road, a lot of truck traffic passes through here to the industries along the river. The rails still look as fresh as the day they rolled out of the mill, replacing several switches on this curve that led to the plant. In contrast, rail traffic to the plant has pretty much shuttered, employment dropping to around 100 workers under the present owner, who purchased the site in 2004. Fortunately for the town of Seaford, other business and industry has expanded along Route 13 and other parts of town, but nothing compared to what it was, a tale all too familiar in company towns across the nation. After placing the first boxcar, the real fun begins. The air is bled off, allowing the cars to be kicked, a maneuver in which the engineer gets the cut up to speed and quickly backs off the throttle and grabs the brake. The conductor pulls the pin before the slack runs out, uncoupling the car, now rolling freely to the desired track, ideally making a hitch into standing cars at 4 miles per hour or less. Kicking cars saves time from having to shove all the way into tracks, a method of flat switching done in rail yards across the world hundreds of times a day, but not often seen in the public eye. With the last car underway, 1203 chases it down and will stop just shy of the switch to get lined toward the newly assembled cut to double against the rest of the train before departing back home to Federalsburg. Now begins the challenge of pulling the train out of the yard with 13 loads on the drawbar. Sand is once again applied to the rails as such an old locomotive struggles not to slip, cycling through the notches until enough momentum keeps the wheels turning. I should probably add some commentary about the state of graffiti on today's railroads, but I really don't have an opinion for or against it. It just is what it is, much like the state of these yard tracks, a once pristine network of polished rails, now rusted over, being reclaimed by nature, until man perhaps someday comes along to paint the canvas anew. As we leave Seaford behind, we look across the field toward Neal's School Road. Those with sharp eyes can make out the block sign that separates the two railroads. Traffic on Route 20 that was waiting for the crossing to clear now passes behind us, drowning out the distant horn as they cross back onto home rails. The train throttles up to speed, framed by one of the many irrigation sprayers that dominate the peninsula, to help produce a good crop on the sandy soil of the coastal plain. The potash we saw earlier is used as fertilizer for its source of soluble potassium. Back at Oak Grove, the whole train rocks into view as they fly westward past the farmstead and back into the state of Maryland. This is the last spot we'd see the train before they set off their cars near Connector Road, returning light to Federalsburg, stopping at Main Street to line the switch to the shop. After relining and locking the switch, 1203 rolls by the former Pennsylvania Railroad station for an early end of the day around 1:30 in the afternoon. The last operating RS-3M in revenue freight service is one of the many endangered anomalies to survive into the year 2025, and the door closes on 1203 tucked away for another cold winter night. Soon the door will close for good on the last chapter in the story of the Maryland and Delaware Railroad, faithfully serving its shortline customers on the Delmarva Peninsula for nearly 5 decades. While the future disposition of the 3 RS-3Ms remains unclear while making this video, the fortunate news is that the Delmarva Central plans to onboard the current employees. The CF7 in Selbyville and SW900-801, also residing in the Federalsburg shop, await their fate as well. Short-line American railroading has always been a place known for helping local economies and a haven of old railroad equipment for rail fans to enjoy. But even the short-line scene is undergoing changes across the nation as operations are sold and consolidated. Carload Express, which operates 2 other short lines in western Pennsylvania, took over Norfolk Southern tracks on the peninsula in 2016, forming the Delmarva Central Railroad. DCR also resumed operations of the Bay Coast Railroad in 2018 between Pocomoke City and the current end of track in Hallwood, Virginia, and the Delaware Coastline in 2019 to Milton and the remnants of the branch between Georgetown and Lewis. Thus, the absorption of the Maryland and Delaware into the DCR in 2025 will bring almost the entire Delmarva under one regional railroad, with the exception of the inactive Snow Hill line below Selbyville, which will be transferred to Maryland and Delaware's parent company, Old Line Holdings Incorporated. On our way home, we followed the Delmarva Secondary catching up to HA1 above Dover on their northbound trip, to our surprise led by an MP-15, approaching the Conrail-era milepost measuring 43 miles from the junction with the Shell Pot below Edgemoor Yard. Delmarva Central runs several jobs out of Dover, Harrington, and Seaford. Today's HA1 heads out of Harrington with a train of mostly empties to be handed off to NS above the town of Clayton. In the distance, we can already see the headlight of NS train K64, shaping up for a timely meet, sitting just above the grade crossing, waiting for HA1 to cut away from their train and duck their power in the siding. K64 then cuts away from their train to make the swap, getting in the clear so HA1 can grab their heavy inbound train for the trip back south to Harrington. This is a fairly quick move that happens several times a week, the longest part of this process being coupling to the train and charging up the air. A few minutes later, and it's showtime once again, as HA1 departs back south off the single track to take the siding around K64, with SD40-2 3505 now doing the honors. A couple horses are stirred up by the commotion, but it won't be long before their machine counterparts depart north, so we'll pack up and join the line of cars waiting at the crossing and head just up the line to Blackbird. K64 wasted no time getting underway, while a C5 Galaxy takes off from Dover Air Force Base in the distance. The SD40-3 leading is a nice touch, the first I've seen since NS started the rebuild program in the Juniata shops in 2021. While most SD40-3s were former BN-turned-leased units before being purchased by NS, 6413 is unique in that it was built for the Milwaukee Road, only now distinguished by its smaller fuel tank. 42 have been rebuilt to date, featuring a new Admiral cab and numerous electrical upgrades, with several more underway including previously rebuilt high hoods. The sun quickly approaches golden hour, now past 4 o'clock, the field at Blackbird offering the last light unstained by shadows quickly setting in, thus concluding our memorable visit to the Delmarva. I hope you enjoyed this video, and hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't already. As always, thanks for watching.